So the other day, my dog looked up at me and said, "Hey Ben, when is the most strategically opportune time to introduce legislation which restores Americans' right to keep and bear arms?" And to that, I thought to myself, man, I really need to stop cleaning my guns indoors. The fumes are really getting to me. Hey guys, it's Ben with GOA and you're watching the Minuteman Moment. In one of our previous videos, we announced that Senator Roger Marshall from Kansas dropped the SHORT Act. That would remove short-barreled rifles, short-barreled shotguns, and any other weapons from the National Firearms Act. But most of you understand something that my dog doesn't, and that is, Congress is not always controlled by Pro-2A members. That's obvious. As for the 118th Congress, the one we're in right now, there just aren't the votes to pass a piece of pro-gun legislation through both the House and the Senate and go to the president's desk. But here's the thing. There's never a bad time to introduce a great bill. Let me explain. Members of Congress are usually the most gung-ho when they're in the minority, because they know that nothing's going to pass, but they can look as though they're strong advocates for whatever they're signaling their support. But once they get their hands on real power, when they're in the majority, or their party controls both chambers and even the executive branch, their immediate response is, don't rock the boat. Because so few members of Congress are actual leaders, they abandon their Second Amendment advocates as soon as they face just a little bit of pushback. But if you can get more members to support great Second Amendment legislation when they're in the minority, that puts them on the record. So when they eventually get back into power and have the ability to pass pro-gun legislation, they're going to look like fools if they don't support what they had previously said they did. We also need to get as many of these members on board with pro-gun legislation now so they have a chance to practice defending it while they're in the minority. They need to learn now who are their allies, who are their enemies, who has their back, and who wants to stick a knife in it. And now that's why it's so important for you to tell your senators and your representatives how much you appreciate them when they sign on to these pro-gun pieces of legislation. After all, there's nothing a politician loves more than looking like a hero. So to them, it's a numbers game. When they see one email from you, they're going to assume that there's a group of silent constituents that feel the exact same way. But they can only think that if you take the time to notify them. And if you call them, that's even more. Let's say double the amount of people that feel the exact same way as you. If you happen to meet them in person, they're going to assume that there's hundreds of people who feel the exact same way. So when you contact your representative and tell them to be pro-gun, you're not just doing it for you, you're doing it for everyone else. Now, on the other hand, let's imagine that members only introduce good bills every 10 years, when self-proclaimed pro-gun politicians have control over both chambers of Congress and the White House. First of all, it probably wouldn't be that great of a bill. Most likely, it'd be a half measure because they're pro-compromise. They're trying to get reelected by appealing to their base and the moderate swing voters. If it wasn't for GOA pushing the no-compromise approach now on the only constitutional right that explicitly says shall not be infringed, politicians would be more than happy to throw bones to the anti-gun crowd and introduce half measures, which don't solve the problem and may create dozens of smaller ones instead. The establishment is focused on compromise. To them, they're okay with meaningless changes to the law. All they really want to do is rearrange deck chairs on the Titanic, or they want to completely capitulate to the other side. And at the end of the day, politicians are people too. We can't forget that. We need to allow them some time to mess up and find their footing to get good pro-gun legislation passed. These things take time for them to figure out how to message, to internalize, and to know how to talk about it. Now, thinking strategically in the long run, it doesn't matter if a bill doesn't currently have the votes in Congress or the support of the president, so long as it's well written and its support is growing. Things are always moving in the right direction. What we generally call this is moving the Overton window, the idea of what's acceptable. Now let me give you an example. Maybe 10 years ago, no one wanted to go against the NFA. A bill like we've seen with the SHORT Act, I'm not sure we would have seen something so strong 5 or even 10 years ago. Certainly not with the support that it is either in Congress or publicly. Now don't get me wrong. The correct time to pass good legislation was yesterday. But none of this happens all at once. GOA has been and is currently leading the fight to repeal the NFA. Now back in the day, GOA was the only pro-gun group working with Ron Paul to co-sponsor just this sort of legislation, with maybe 1 or 2 co-sponsors in the House. But now, we're working alongside a sitting US Senator, and we've helped him craft and introduce this bill with other Senate co-sponsors who are willing to go on record to gut major parts of the NFA. That's in addition to getting dozens of unique members of the House of Representatives to sign on to repealing different parts of the NFA. Well, we could only get to that point in the conversation if we pushed for this when we didn't have the numbers. The fact is, things only move in politics when they're pushed, and there's never a bad time to push or start to push. So help us by keeping this momentum by reaching out to your senators. Tell them to support Senator Marshall's bill, and tell your congressman to support Congressman Clyde's bill. The hotline to call Congress is displayed below. If you agree or disagree with what I'm saying, Let me know below on what you think is the best strategy for passing laws. Also, make sure to like and subscribe because it helps get the video out. As always, thanks for watching.